Good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Gero Carletto. I'm a manager in the Development Data Group at the World Bank, but I'm here today in my capacity as co-chair of the Intersecretariat Working Group on Household Surveys, together with my partner in crime, Papa Sek, whom you will hear from at the end in the closing. Today's event has been organized by the Intersecretariat Working Group on Household Survey, which is a group which was established in 2015 under the aegis of the UN Statistical Commission, with the objective of fostering collaboration in household surveys, promote innovation, and advocate for household surveys. Last year, as part of the work program of the Intersecretariat Working Group, we published a paper called "Positioning Household Surveys for the Next Decade." And the motivation of the paper was to try to, given the fast-paced changes in the data landscape and the role that household surveys continues to play. So the idea of the paper was to try to converge like among key stakeholders on a common vision on what household surveys should look like, at least for the next in the next upcoming years. So the paper, which you will find on the Intersecretariat Working Group website, but also probably Howie Charlotte can put in the chat in case you have not seen it, kind of identifies 8 technical priorities. Ranging from improving sampling efficiency and coverage, scaling up the use of objective measurement, systematizing the use of meta and paradata for quality assurance purposes, improving access and discoverability of microdata, and enhance the interoperability and integration of surveys with other data sources. So today is the first of a series of events being organized by the Intersecretariat Working Group around the positioning paper, and you will hear about the first of these 8 technical priorities. So the paper also kind of beyond the technical priorities try also to list a number of enabling conditions to make these changes possible, and how national government and the development partners can contribute to create those enabling conditions. So I encourage you to read the paper. I mean, it's a living document in a way. So if you have any comment, reactions, suggestions, because we're using the paper also as a blueprint for the work of the Intersecretariat Working Group moving forward. So we always welcome your suggestion. So as I was saying, today you will hear from several speakers about the first of the technical priorities identified in the position paper. So what you will hear today are some applications, some innovative applications on how we can use household surveys in an integrated fashion with other data sources, and how we can promote this concept of interoperability by design in a way that we can add value to household surveys in the way that they can be used, for instance, for calibration purposes for other data sources, but also to potentially adjust for biases. So we have a very rich program today. We have 7 presentations, so I will have to, as I will be moderating and playing the timekeeper. So I encourage all the speakers, as I already have in the past, to please keep to your allotted 7 minutes. So we have 7 presentation times 7. If my math is right, it's close to 50 minutes. So which will be important to keep within, in order to allow for some time for questions and answers, and take some questions from participants. So let's start right away with the first of the 7 presentations, which will be by Naba Malika, or Malika Dainja, who is a data scientist at UNICEF. She will be presenting a paper which she co-authored with Jennifer Yor, which is a senior program manager at the Center on Gender and Equity and Health at the University of San Diego. So I will let Malika start, and she will tell you title and content of her nice paper. Malika, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Gero, and morning, everyone. I'll just share my presentation. Yeah. Yeah, apologies everyone for my broken voice. I'm recovering from a COVID infection. So I'm Malika, data scientist at UNICEF. I'll, however, be presenting on representing my previous organization for today in this talk, which is the Center on Gender Equity and Health at University of California, San Diego, who've supported this research, which presents a case study on integrating social media and household survey data from India to understand online violence against women. So this case study highlights potential ways in which we can integrate household survey data with big data sources to answer relevant questions related to social sciences. So a bit of a context on the problem statement of this case study before getting into the nitty-gritties of data integration. So online violence against women is highly prevalent and an emerging form of violence. This research focuses on one particular form of online violence against women, which is online misogyny. Online misogyny prevalence has been noted to be on the rise on social media platforms since the pandemic. However, there is limited information on what are the different drivers or correlated risk factors for online misogyny, partly due to lack of information related to these aspects in one specific survey or in a single data source. So we wanted to explore the feasibility of integrating social media data with household survey data to answer the research question for this study, which is, are offline normative attitudes and behaviors associated with the prevalence of online misogyny in India? The hypothesis here was that districts in India which have adverse prevalence of offline normative attitudes and behaviors will likely have a higher prevalence of online misogyny on Twitter as well. And to test this hypothesis, we relied on 2 separate sources of data, as I mentioned. The first is the DHS, or Demographic Health Survey, which, as I believe everyone here is familiar with, which is one of the large-scale household surveys carried out across countries. The last round of DHS in India was conducted between 2019 and 2021, which is what we've used for this study. And the second source of data we've used is the Twitter data. So the DHS collects and provides geolocations for each of its primary sampling units. We've used these geolocations to collect geocoded tweets that were posted during the 12 months prior to the date of the survey using Twitter's official API. So there are 2 things that essentially facilitated this exercise and this research, which is the availability of geolocations in the Demographic Health Survey and the availability of geocoded tweets for public use by Twitter. So we've used multiple variables from the DHS survey data that captured offline attitudes and behaviors, such as attitude towards IPV, prevalence of IPV, freedom of movement for women, women's economic agency, etc. And these variables were calculated as prevalences at the district level. While from the Twitter data, we estimated online misogyny prevalence using machine learning natural language processing algorithms. This is an ecological analysis, and our sample size was 662 districts. We ran separate adjusted fractional regression models, which take into account the bounded nature of our outcome variables here to test our hypothesized relationships. So the results from our regression models showed that districts in India with higher prevalence of adverse attitude towards intimate partner violence and adverse or higher prevalence of IPV and lack of women's economic agency were the districts likely to have higher prevalence of online violence or online misogyny on Twitter. So these findings outline the fact that online violence is an extension of gender inequalities in the offline world. Online misogynistic rhetoric occurs together with offline context where control of and violence against women is acceptable and normative. What this means is that online violence prevention efforts, they need to be a part of the overall agenda of violence against women, given the strong links between offline and online gender behavior. So to wrap up the presentation, some of the key aspects and learnings with regards to integration of social media data with household data. So with respect to ethics and confidentiality, while Demographic Health Survey has standard procedures with regards to ethics for collecting data on violence against women, all the ethical standard practices were followed in dealing with social media data by our research team. Identifiers were removed prior to any analysis. No tweets were published verbatim or they were not quoted in our research publications to ensure that the original authors cannot be identified. And a data management system that adhered to confidentiality rules of Twitter was set up. Next, one of the important points to note when integrating social media data with household survey data is the difference between the two data sources with respect to sampling design or the lack thereof for social media data. So to account for some of this mismatch between the two different data sources, we restricted this analysis to urban geographies in India alone, because social media and Twitter specifically is primarily an urban phenomena in India. Secondly, we also accounted for certain fixed effects in our statistical models to adjust for these mismatches. We also tried to use propensity score matching to build a pseudo population in the demographic health survey data of those who potentially use Twitter in India. However, we failed to run these models successfully because of lack of granular data in India on social demographic characteristics of Twitter users in the country. Third, as I noted before, the availability of geolocations in demographic health survey, a practice that is not standard to many large-scale household surveys, allowed for the consolidation of data from these different sources. And this really opens up a lot of possibilities of integration with a host of different sources of non-traditional or big data sources. For example, in another one of our research studies, we've integrated this DHS India data with data from satellite imagery, which identifies the DHS primary sampling units as having experienced a climate shock during a relevant time frame. Relatedly, and finally, given that these demographic health surveys are conducted across different countries, this analysis of integrating it with any publicly available and geocoded big data or social media data, we believe can be tested out in other geographical contexts as well. So that's all from me for today. Before I end, I would like to thank the Emerge project, which supported this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Malika. So you were in perfect time, like 7 minutes exactly. So I encourage everybody else following you to follow the same punctuality. Just as a signal, I will turn my camera off on 1 minute before the end. So therefore, when you see me, when you see my face, please rush. So you will have a 1 minute. So Let's jump to the next presentation, which is by Aida Khalil, who is a statistician in the FAO Chief Statistician Office, and Aida will be talking about integrating surveys with additional data sources to disaggregate the SDGs indicators, and she will go through very quickly about several of the experiences that FAO has been working on. Aida, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gero. So with the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, all member states have committed to leave no one behind and reach the farthest behind first. And this has generated a tremendous increase in the demand of disaggregated data and statistics. Not only many goals are directly concerned with the most vulnerable population, but at the very core of the SDG monitoring framework, there's an overarching principle of data disaggregation, stating that SDG indicators should be disaggregated by relevant disaggregation dimensions, in accordance with the fundamental principle of official statistics. In this framework, traditional sample surveys can provide important information on the social, economic, and environmental dimensions of target populations. And they represent the essential data source for almost 1/3 of SDG indicators in the global SDG monitoring framework. Despite the substantial progresses that have been made in the last decade in terms of availability, frequency, and quality of household surveys, these data sources alone are not enough to monitor all SDG indicators by all relevant disaggregation dimension. And for this reason, like with this presentation, I would like to give some examples of how the FAO is using data integration techniques to overcome some of the main limitations of sample surveys to produce precise disaggregated estimates of SDG indicators. So let's first see let's say the main technical challenge that we are trying to address through data disaggregation. Sample surveys are normally planned to produce reliable estimates in planned estimation domains, meaning estimation domains that were accounted for at the sampling design stage. These are normally the overall national population and other broad disaggregation domains. However, the sample size of most surveys is not large enough to guarantee precise estimates for all subpopulations and geographical areas. And in addition, in many cases, we have sample size that do not cover all disaggregation domains. So we have out of sample domains. This type of issues can be addressed at different level of the statistical production process. We could address these issues at the sampling design stage, for example, by adopting sampling strategies that guarantee an observed set of sampling units for every disaggregation domain. Of course, this would translate in an exponentially increased sample size and the survey cost. Otherwise, we can adopt, let's say, techniques to address the data disaggregation issue at the data analysis stage by adopting indirect estimation techniques, such as, for example, small area estimation, allowing to integrate survey data with additional data sources to borrow strength from different disaggregation domains or points in time. So in a nutshell, small area estimation techniques allow to increase estimates precision of a given parameter of interest in so-called small areas, where with small areas will mean disaggregation domains with a too little or zero sample size. Normally, this increase of precision is achieved through modeling procedures, allowing to integrate survey data at the unit or at the area level with additional information retrieved from multiple possible sources, such as censuses, administrative records, geospatial information, and other sources of big data. So when implementing small area estimation, there are various aspects that need to be taken into account and technical requirements that should be met. And for this reason, it's very important to provide national statistical offices with clear guidelines on how to implement these techniques on specific indicators, such as, for example, SDG indicators. And although the literature on small area estimation techniques is quite broad, The example on SDG indicators, especially those relevant to food and agriculture, are still quite limited. And for this reason, in the FAO, we started implementing case studies and experiments on some of the SDG indicators under our custodianship to see the performance and the scalability of small area estimation techniques on, let's say, our SDG indicators. For example, we implemented a case study on indicator 5A1, measuring the access of women to ownership and secure rights over agricultural land. In this case, we used a unit-level small area estimation model, integrating survey microdata from the Ugandan National Panel Survey with the population and housing census. And thanks to these approaches, we were able to produce granular subnational estimates and gender disaggregated estimates of this indicator with an increased level of precision. Additionally, we implemented a case study on SDG indicators 231 and 232, respectively measuring the average labor productivity and income of small-scale food producers. For this case study, we used an area-level small area estimation model, integrating direct estimates of the two indicators with area-level auxiliary information retrieved from various geospatial information systems. And also in this case, we were able to increase the precision of estimates at the subnational level. In particular, here we used data from Mali. So we were able to produce disaggregated estimates of these two indicators in Mali. Then we implemented a case study for SDG indicator 212 on the prevalence of moderate and severe food insecurity in the population of Malawi by integrating two independent surveys this time, a small survey measuring the indicator of interest with a larger survey, precisely an LSMS integrated household survey, that wasn't collecting the variable of interest, but was collecting a set of auxiliary variables that we could use to implement the so-called projection estimator. All these case studies are, let's say, presented in a comprehensive publication called Guidelines on Data Disaggregation for SDG Indicators Using Survey Data, where we present methods and tools to implement data disaggregation both at the sampling design stage and at the data analysis stage. To conclude, I would like to mention other resources and initiatives implemented by the FAO. The first one, so using these case studies, we have contributed to the essay for SDG wiki guide developed by the Intersecretariat Working Group on Household Surveys. So all these case studies are accessible both from FAO website and the wiki guide. Based on the case study on SDG indicator 231, we have published an article on the Statistical Journal of the IAUS that is accessible free of charge. We have also developed a comprehensive set of training materials on data disaggregation and small area estimation for the SDGs that have been used for various virtual trainings with several countries. In this slide, I put the link to two of the virtual trainings that were organized so that you can access the recordings of the training, but also all the training material on small area estimation. And based on this experience, we are now supporting countries in the implementation of data integration techniques and small area estimation for SDG indicators under FAO custodianship. So thank you.
Thank you, Ada. So
I saw your face,
that,
and
my appearance had an impact. That's thank you. No, you actually, I mean, you did a fantastic job given the amount of information that you presented, but this is why I encourage everyone to access all those resources on the FAO website, but also a lot of this material will be made available through the link to the event on the Intersecretariat Working Group website. So somebody was also asking whether the video will be available. We will make everybody available, the presentations, the videos, and everything on the Intersecretariat Working Group website. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to Kieran Walsh. Kieran, is a senior statistician in the labor force survey methodology team at the ILO in the ILO Department of Statistics. And they will be presenting some work that he has been conducting in Sri Lanka. So Kieran, I will let you do the rest.
Thanks, Cheryl. And thanks, chairs and organizers, for inviting me to present at this. So I am going to talk about what might seem like a not particularly innovative aspect of interoperability, which is the ability to apply similar standards or definitions across different household surveys. But I think while not necessarily hugely innovative, it's a very important and practical concern. The context for the work we have been doing is the adoption in the last decade of a series of important international statistical standards. These are adopted at the International Conference of Labour Statisticians, or ICLS, every 5 years. And what is ultimately done is definitions on core concepts are adopted based on extensive consultation and discussion for application across different sources. And of course, then if those standards are applied across different sources, you would hope to have a relatively greater degree of comparability and interoperability across those sources. So since 2013, reflecting the key standards developed in the last decade, we have, the ILO has been engaged in pilot studies and guidance developments on application of the standards and good measurement practices, particularly with a focus on the LFS, it must be said. So key standards, the 19th ICLS in 2013, most important thing was a new definition of employment, I suppose it could be said. I mean, there were many important aspects. There's a new definition of work, a new forms of work framework, but for practical purposes across surveys, the new employment definition, which is a narrower definition than before, is particularly important. We had a conference in 2018, which had a resolution on statistics on work relationships. And we have a forthcoming conference in October of this year that will focus on informality. So that's a bit of a background. What we were asked to do at the time the standards were developed or adopted was to do methodological work to see how they can be applied. And in 2015 to 2017, we did an extensive round of studies across 10 countries, focusing on core labour market concepts and indicators in the labour force survey, so employment, unemployment, and so on. And in follow-up between 2017 and 2019, we did a joint study in collaboration with the World Bank and the Department of Census and Statistics in Sri Lanka, where the focus was an in-depth study of the application of the 19th ICLS standards in different types of household surveys. And since then, we've been working on, and during that period, we've been working on other topics like volunteer work, informality, unpaid domestic and care work, and so on. And for the purposes of a discussion in interoperability, I'm going to talk in a little more detail about the study we did in Sri Lanka, as Jero mentioned. So the objective of this study was to assess how the 19th ICLS standards and the new definitions could be applied in different types of household surveys. So we had an LFS type questionnaire based on models that we have published, and we had a multi-topic living standard survey, which was developed by colleagues in the World Bank. And both were, at least conceptually, developed to apply the same definitions, but with different structure, flow, and wording of the questions and questionnaires, reflecting their different objectives and coverage. So we had a particular focus in the project on gender gaps, and we had funding from Hewlett Foundation and Data2X to support the studies. The methodological design was a round of cognitive testing of both questionnaires, followed by 2 rounds of quantitative testing, where we used a split sample design of 1,000 households per questionnaire visited twice, with a focus on mainly rural districts by design, because the impact of the new standards was particularly large on the agricultural sector. So what conclusions did we reach? Well, we found that women's employment was particularly sensitive to design. And I say again, because this was also highlighted in previous studies. So to give a more specific illustration of that, in the first round of the quantitative studies, the LFS identified over 20% more women's employment than the multi-topic survey. With the undercount, based on detailed analysis, the undercount was focused in casual, lower hours work and work helping in family businesses and farms. I could say that was just one of the findings, but this was I think, quite important one for interoperability. What we narrowed down as the reasons for this were there was a lack of dedicated questions to capture work helping in family businesses or casual work. It's not that they weren't targeted, but just they had less dedicated questions than the LFS. And in addition, technical language and difficulty in translation of terms was also considered to be important. So in round 2, changes were made and the difference was reduced to 6% for both women and men. So that's obviously a substantial narrowing of the gap between the surveys. And probably if we were to summarize what that tells us, the difficulty is not to capture formal employment or cases where employment is the main activity. Rather, the difficulty is to capture secondary and casual employment, which is consistent with previous findings we would have had ourselves. So other conclusions on interoperability, given the topic we have, well, applying common definitions is one important element of interoperability, but common definitions are not sufficient to ensure comparability, and careful questionnaire design is clearly needed. So it's not enough to say we apply the same standards. You really need to focus on the questionnaire design. Adaptation to national context for using local examples, local terms, and good translation to context, not just literal translation, are clearly critical to improve comparability. And the type of survey does matter, but gaps can be reduced. The objective of the survey is very important. So if it's a main source of labour indicators, you might approach differently than if it's mainly a contextual variable, like in a living standard survey or poverty survey and so on. And the standard model questionnaires that different organizations produce are very useful, but they should be subject to extensive testing also at the national level when they're going to be used. And they do need to contain what we consider to be common elements like questions on absences and main intended destination of production. So that's a bit of a quick walkthrough. Could talk for hours about the other findings, but I do just want to highlight some of the published resources that we have, labour force survey resources. I do want to mention as well, we have resources designed for the census of population, which can be useful because they're designed to have a short sequence similar to the work that was done with the World Bank to develop guidelines on measurement of labour in different types of household surveys, which I didn't link here because I couldn't find the link this morning, but that guidebook has also been published. So thank you very much. Sorry for the rush, but hopefully got some points across.
Thank you, Kieran, and thanks for refraining from speaking for hours. I'm sure it would have been quite interesting, but this is the first of a series of events. So we're gonna try to create more opportunities for discussions. So please stay tuned. So next in the lineup are my good friends Manos Antonini and Silvia Montoya. Manos, hi Manos.
Hello.
Long time.
Unfortunately, I think you will only have me.
I know. But we're still you're still good friends. Like Silvia is still a good friend. That's so Manos Antonini is the director of the Global Education Monitoring Report and co-chair of the Technical Cooperation Group on SDG 4. Silvia is the director of the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. So Manos, I will let you do all the talking and Silvia the listening.
Indeed, unfortunately, we had a clash, so we had to take a decision on that. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a paper along the lines of the previous two. Essentially, interoperability is at the heart of it, and even more so, the need to make more efficient and fuller use of the data. In this case, on education, I will present a model that we have developed to estimate the out-of-school rate that combines administrative and survey data, a joint work between the Institute for Statistics and the Global Education Monitoring Report. The out-of-school rate is no longer a global indicator, although I will say and show how that is linked to the overall SDG 4 work that we're doing. It used to be the flagship indicator during the MDGs. And at the time, there had been a clear identification of a need for a methodology that would combine multiple data sources to estimate the out-of-school rate and, of course, the out-of-school number that comes out of the population estimates. That's how a 2005 reports of UIS and UNICEF had described it, the need for some sort of composite approach for estimating time series and producing estimates for the most recent year. So there was also an element of nowcasting. I think at the time, education was not the first to discover that need. That need appeared in several fronts. The most obvious one, the case of health indicators, I flag here the work of the interagency group for child mortality estimation. The modeling strategy we have followed is that we recognize that out-of-school rates can be sourced from either source. Administrative data are not subject to sampling errors, but we have problems with them in terms of invalid observations because simply the enrollment information and the population information that is necessary to calculate the rate are coming from two different sources. And in fact, 1 in 4 observations that we have were essentially negative, as if they're negative out-of-school rates, which is of course not possible. Data series are also not always complete, which was another challenge. On the other side, survey data, as we heard also from the FAO presentation, are infrequent, subject to sampling errors, and potentially sometimes, for all sorts of reasons, also to large biases. Now, what is the insight that we have used for this model is that while the out-of-school rates are typically reported by level, in fact, they're not constant within a particular level. They're fluid, they're smooth curves as children progress through the education, their education trajectory. So there is a cohort-like structure that we have been exploiting. Students who, of course, drop out in 1 year are out the next, extremely unlikely to return. We have modeled male and female rates independently. I mentioned one type of problem we tried to solve, which was the negative out-of-school rates. But another interesting observation to make about the structure of the data we use is that 4 out of the 5 observations come from administrative data, 1 in 5 come from survey data, but as you can imagine, they come from those countries which tend to have a bigger gap in terms of school censuses. So therefore, the two need to complement each other. This is a little bit of the type of data that feed into 8 country examples portrayed with each with different characteristics, some with flows that are quite smooth over time, others that are very checkered, some countries that only rely on survey information. You see that the model provides curves for every single age group and over time with confidence intervals, which of course are much larger when we only rely on household surveys. Each observation on the left-hand side of each pair of countries is represented by a distinct point. And then you can see also on the right the types of sources and of course the age group for which each observation refers to. We can present the same information also by age, which is an innovation in the model. You see the intervals also by vertical lines. You see the different sources of observations depending on the color that you see, and the legend identifies these sources. You can find the results of this model in a website, a joint website with of the UIS and the GEM report, which is called View, where you can see the underlying observations and also the fitted curves that help really fill important gaps on this particular indicator for the 3 levels, 3 age groups, primary, lower secondary, and upper secondary school age, both for males and females, and for total. A paper was launched and will be regularly launched now every September on the estimates. And you see from there how we have tried to fill gaps that existed for many countries, for instance, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is here. And the paper is already published as a technical paper that you can access at this address and is currently being submitted for publication and for review. Closing, I just want to say that the out-of-school rate model is has a sister model which focuses on the SDG 4 Global Indicator 412, which is the completion rate, an indicator that was approved with the 2020 review. The paper for that has been published late last year in the Journal of the Royal Statistical Society. And our next step is to essentially try to now integrate the two models so that we have a kind of general equilibrium of the education system that integrates both the out-of-school progression and the ultimate attainment of every child in the population, and hopefully linking that now also to adult levels. Finally, we, like FAO, are also constantly exploring opportunities for disaggregating these estimates. As things stand, we only do that by sex, but there are clearly opportunities for modeling disaggregation by different groups. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manus. So you guys are making my job extremely easy. I mean, I don't have to police anyone. So far, so good. So which is great. We'll have plenty of time for discussions. And please post any question that you might have on the chat, or if we get a chance, we'll leave you. We'll open the mic for any questions after the last presentation. So far we heard a lot of good experiences, but one thing that I kind of was reflecting on, that not only we're talking about integration of data sources, but it's also has been a good the approach, has been a good way to also integrate institutions in working together, because often these data sources come from different institutions, come from different instruments. So I think this is also something to reflect on as we move ahead with the presentations and the discussion. So next, it's Eva Quintana. Eva is a statistics specialist and household survey expert with UNICEF Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey Program. I see Attila is also online, so we will give him the floor later for any comments he might have. So Eva, I will leave you the floor. You're mute, Eva. You're mute. Nope, still on mute. Now you go ahead.
I know. What I did is I went on live camera, but not.
Yeah, well, that's you're both alive and I'm
mute. Okay, I hope that I'm okay. Good. So today I'm going to be speaking about the piloting of integration of mixed data to education admin data. And this is a pilot that is ongoing in 2 countries, in Eswatini and Fiji. This pilot is part of a larger MixLink initiative, and MixLink is basically a different set of approaches and methods to integrate mixed data with data from other sources. And the motivation behind MixLink is a general approach to increase the analytical power and the potential applications of mix. And some of the issues that other colleagues in previous presentations have already discussed. But I wanted to highlight, because I think it is of a specific interest and relevance for the mix, the piloting of integration between mix and education admin data, is that we see great value of integration in promoting use of household survey data to inform sector planning and monitoring. So as UNICEF, we work with a wide range of stakeholders across multiple sectors, and we find ourselves as UNICEF involved in different data work streams, right? We provide technical support in collection of household survey data. We also support strengthening of admin systems for specific sectors like child protection, health, nutrition, education. A lot of these efforts are often fragmented and across the organization, and because of the complexity of the national data ecosystems. What we find is that sector specialists are often find themselves more familiar with certain sources, data sources than others. And so we see the data integration and the mixed link initiative as an opportunity to also promote better understanding of household survey across sector colleagues, and also to contribute to the improved efficiency and the quality of investments in national data ecosystems. So before I go to the, I speak about the mix link to EMI's data, I wanted to mention briefly that mix has been experimenting and with linking to other resources for quite some time. So in the 2000s, we started linking mix to vaccination records in health facilities. We've conducted also a study in Côte d'Ivoire where we collected information and a census of healthcare providers during mixed data collection, and we linked that information. We're currently piloting the education link, and we're exploring other opportunities, including linking to GIS sources and health monitoring and information systems, like, for example, in the case of Qatar, where we're looking at the opportunity to link with anthropometric data that is in records, in health admin records. Now, when it comes to the mix link to education admin data, the relevance and the value for the sector is that, as you know, of course, education outcomes are a function of a combination of different factors, in classroom environment, home environment, school environment. So by linking mix and EMI's data, what we are able to do is bring together information about the home environment and information about the school environment, which is something we cannot do by looking at these data sources separately. Then, when we link these sources, we can ask questions about, for example, what is how does parental support to learning contribute to education outcomes, controlling for school characteristics, right? So these are just some examples. Now, the third element, the classroom environment, is something that relates more to the teacher-student interaction, and it's not something we can address through this type of linking because it requires a separate data collection approach. Now speaking more specifically about the experience in the Swatini and Fiji pilots, I wanted to highlight, a few key considerations and lessons, and I think I've organized them in buckets. And the first one is about ownership, and I don't think I can emphasize this enough, especially in settings where this has not been attempted before, like the linking of household survey data, in this case mixed data, with an admin system. Consultations, you can not underestimate how much time and effort needs to be invested in fostering that dialogue and the consultations and understanding why integration is useful or needed and how that is going to be analyzed, that information is going to be analyzed. In our experience, the process to establish and access data, the modality and to actually access data has been quite lengthy and has had impacts in the timeline of the implementation of these projects. Feasibility assessment is another important aspect. Of course, we want to, before we set out to roll out an initiative like this, we want to be certain that this is something that we're able to do, like to link these sources. We had limitations, and we faced limitations to do an assessment because of the lack of the metadata or access to it, and the lack of access to the data. So we've been sort of learning as we were going through the process and finding challenges on the way. Ethical concerns are key and important. As you know, school records capture a lot of individual data on teachers, students, and staff. So this is sensitive data. One of the ways we addressed the sensitivities around this was to really narrow the data integration to aggregated level data from schools. So we're not linking individual records about teachers or students, only using and linking the school characteristics, to the sample, the mixed sample. Timeliness, another important aspect to consider. Once because these are two existing data sets. We're not like really going to schools to collect additional data. We needed to find what is the reporting period of the EMIS data that actually corresponds to the school year in session. During mixed data collection, we found that there were some delays in data entry and the EMIS data entry, and we've had to work with EMIS teams to actually prioritize data entry for a mix of schools so that we could have that data available. Another important aspect that I wanted to highlight is the harmonization of admin units. In Fiji, for example, the MEHA education districts don't match the census admin units that are usually used in household surveys. So we had to use a combination of GPS coordinates for schools and other variables to actually align the schools with the mixed admin units. And that was also quite a lengthy process. Overall, the school identification process through MIX worked well. We integrated the list of schools from the EMIS dataset with their respective identifiers into our CAPI entry application. We asked mixed respondents to report the name and the location of the schools attended by children. And interviewers used that information to select and identify schools from the drop-down menu of the EMIS list of schools. As I mentioned, this worked pretty well. Still, we had some relatively small percentage of mismatch cases, of schools that could not be found in the EMIS list. But after some manual reconciliation of inconsistencies, the initial findings suggest that school records were not linked for a relatively small percentage of children, about 6% in Fiji and less than 3% in Eswatini. Now, some final thoughts. As I mentioned, this was the first attempt to integrate household survey and EMIS data, and specifically mixed household survey data in Eswatini and Fiji. And so in this context, I think we believe that this has contributed to the increased awareness among education stakeholders about what data is available to them through MIX. This has also created synergies with other UNICEF initiatives to promote the use and the understanding and interpretation of mixed data, and specifically in the education sector. What we found is obviously that readiness of the admin system for integration with MIX is going to vary across settings. And we are going to find some common issues that can be approached in a standardized way, but also we're going to face significantly different challenges that will require a lot of attention to specific settings. But overall, the pilots are informing our framework and helping inform the development of a framework that will guide the integration of mixed and EMIS data in the future, and that we think can be applied to similar approaches for integration with other admin data. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Very, very interesting. And I was actually very pleasantly surprised about the low level of mismatch, kind of a linkage between the two sources. I would expect a lot more, but maybe in the question and answer, maybe we can discuss a little bit more about what did you learn, if there is any lesson learned from looking at the data in terms of what are the main drivers of this mismatch, or what could be possible causes. But we can talk later about it if we have time, and we will have time because the next presenter will finish in exactly 7 minutes. So the next presenter is Talib Kilic, who is a program manager in the Living Standard Measurement Study in the Development Data Group at the World Bank. Talib you can start putting up the presentation. Talib will speak about an application to agricultural data in terms of integrating geospatial data and ground data, which is part of a larger project in the Living Standard Measurement Study team. Talib, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe, so much. Jero, can you confirm if you can see my entire screen?
Yes, we can see your dog too.
Okay, and what about now?
Yeah, I think it's fine. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So it's good to be with you today in this lightning round of very interesting presentations. Thank you again for the invitation. As Jero said, this morning I'm going to be talking a bit about our ongoing work within the World Bank as part of the LSMS, but also under the aegis of the 50 by 30 initiative, to understand how large-scale surveys can support Earth observation applications for high-resolution crop type mapping and crop yield estimation in low-income countries. So, so a bit of background on our work. Sorry. Okay. So much of our work is motivated because of the importance of agriculture to rural livelihoods. In the case of sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, it can contribute up to 85% of rural household income. To monitor progress towards international as well as national goals in agriculture, we need accurate measures of crop areas, production and yields, not only at the national level, but with sufficient within-country disaggregation, as has been the theme of many of the presentations today. So these data can guide targeting as well as evaluation of policies and interventions, not only in agriculture, but also in social protection and disaster risk management as well. However, in many lower income countries that rely on smallholder farming and that also need the productivity improvements the most, these data are either unavailable or unreliable. So in parallel, what has been a game changer in the last few years has been the increase in the high-resolution satellite imagery, both free imagery provided by the governments as well as gated imagery from the private sector. So this is European Space Agency's Sentinel-2 satellites, which are providing 10-meter resolution imagery for the entire Earth every 5 days, and they're doing that for free. So as a result, we started observing agricultural plots in smallholding farming systems with clarity that we could not have imagined just a few years ago. But still, what we need is data to train and validate the models that are then applied to these high-resolution satellite imagery to obtain agricultural data and statistics with improved spatial and temporal scale. So what we know from the literature that has focused on integration of surveys and satellites is that training data absolutely does have a bearing on the quality and the precision of the satellite-based estimates. So we've showcased this in Mali as well as in Uganda. We've also seen that much of the research has actually been conducted at the subnational level, so not at scale, not covering entire countries or regions, and they differed quite a bit in terms of the type and approach to the data that they collect on the ground to be able to train and calibrate these models. And we also know that recurrent large-scale surveys can collect specific types of georeference data in a way that can also address the training data needs for these Earth observation applications. But currently, as has been the theme for many of the presentations today, we don't necessarily have clear recommendations on the survey methods and the fieldwork protocols that the large-scale surveys should adopt to generate the right training data. And obviously, these requirements would also vary based on what we're trying to monitor, say crop areas versus crop yields. So against this background, we've been pursuing a multi-year work program under the 50 by 30 initiative to basically conduct rigorous research to answer specific questions we have on how large-scale surveys should be designed and implemented to provide the right training data for the Earth observation applications that want to leverage these rapidly improving satellite imagery space. We've been focusing on crop area and crop yield monitoring, and particularly on cereal crops in this first phase. The main outputs that we're going to be actually releasing in the second quarter of this year will be these guidelines for large-scale surveys to adopt to be able to generate the right training data for these Earth observation applications. And there's several additional outputs that may be of interest, ranging from research papers to actually high-resolution maps that we will create in the process of these research that will be made available for free, as well as training data sets that others interested in this kind of research can use in downstream efforts. And in all of this work, our implementing partner has been Atlas AI. So the main achievements in this first 3-year work, we put out this first working paper and then later published a journal article that focused on maze area mapping in Malawi and Ethiopia, where we integrated existing georeference national survey data with satellite imagery and other geovariables and leveraged machine learning techniques to basically understand how much training data we need, what kind of approach we need to follow on the ground while we're georeferencing plot locations, and whether different types of satellite data or exclusion of plots under specific area thresholds affect our algorithmic accuracy. We've generated also in this process, as I mentioned, crop area and maze area maps for Malawi and Ethiopia for several reasons, and they're for several seasons, and they're made available on Development Data Hub. And this work has been extended to other countries and other crops, and that is ongoing. And most of this work is also informing the activities and the work planning of United Nations Joint Task Team on Earth Observation. So just a few takeaways from research, and then I'll be wrapping up. So as a result of this to date, we've seen that collecting the complete plot boundary is a preferred method of collecting georeference data on agriculture. Even if we have seemingly small erosion in model accuracy based on suboptimal approaches of georeference data collection, when you add them up, the resulting maps and the extent of differences across models that are trained on different training data, actually the aggregate results could be quite different from one another, ranging from 8 to 24% of overestimation in maze area. If implementers cannot collect the full boundary, they can collect a complete set of plot corners and approximate the boundary. So we've showcased this to be acceptable, and we need about 60% of the training data actually once we have the right data. So we also don't need it for everywhere, which is also effective for cost effectiveness purposes. So here are maps which are publicly available to date. And as I mentioned, we have several ongoing research activities, and one of the main things that we'll be putting out later in April will be these guidelines for large-scale surveys to support Earth observation applications, as well as additional crop area and crop yield maps, which will be made available on Development Data Hub, and these training data sets that I mentioned for others to use, and other research outputs. So thank you so much. And sorry, Jero, for going a minute over time.
No, I think I didn't notice. That was fine. So you get a. No, I think thanks, Talib. Just a small comment on the presentation, which is how on the importance of thinking on the scale up of a lot of the work that we have been doing, or individually or collectively in this realm, in this area. So because I think it becomes important not only if we want to, mainstream some of those techniques into broader use, into official statistics. I think there is the issue of how we come up with the necessary scale. And in trying to achieve scale, we also need to consider what the costs are of all these different options. For example, Talib was talking about what is the right training data set, and different training data set will have different costs. And these are things that we need to consider when we want to think. When we need to think on how to scale up, on how statistical offices or other counterpart other partners can pick up on the guidelines and ultimately achieve some scale. So that's without further ado, we'll go to the last but not least presentation of the day. So it's Alamgir Hossain. I hope I pronounce correctly, Alamgir. Alamgir is a Deputy Director and Focal Point Officer of SDG cell at the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, and is also the Project Director of Sample Vital Registration System Project at the Bureau of Statistics. So Alamgir, I will give you the floor. If you can please bring up your presentation, and you have 7 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. Actually, I will share a few of our experiences. Is my I hope my PPT is showing properly.
No, can you put on PowerPoint on the slideshow?
Okay now?
Setting. Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
So today, actually, I will share some of our exercise experiences using of nighttime light data through the random forest model in Bangladesh for poverty estimation. It was one of the joint exercise by the different stakeholders along with the National Statistics Office. This exercise was actually done by with the support from the Data for Now initiative by the UNSD. So before going to the thing, that we need to know the context, the administrative context of Bangladesh first. That in Bangladesh, actually, we generate the poverty data through the household service, household income and expenditure survey. But that survey has some limitations to provide data, mostly up to the district level, some district level. So currently in Bangladesh, actually, the administrative divisions are actually 8 separate divisions and 64 districts. And there are other 577 upazila, that is sub-districts level. So to estimate the poverty at the granular level, it is very challenging one through the direct estimate of through the different surveys or household income and expenditure survey. So in Bangladesh, we exercise the small area estimation technique in Bangladesh using the survey data with the census data, particularly household income and expenditure survey data and the population housing census data. Though we are using those unconventional conventional data, but recently we have exercised some conventional non-conventional data to estimate the poverty in Bangladesh under with the support of Data for Now initiative. You can see here the poverty mapping, the conventional poverty mapping in the left side, the two separate administrative area. In the left side one is the district level poverty estimate, and the second one map is showing the sub-district, that is upazila level poverty mapping. So in those mapping exercises, we have already we are using actually the ELL method, that is the Albert Lenjo method for the poverty estimation through the small area technique. But we have tried a different method using the nighttime light data to estimate the poverty and try to validate it. How is it working with the ELL method? So for this particular exercise, we have used the few platforms and data for this particular exercise for analyzing the raster data. Using the raster data, we have used the nighttime light data, and we have used Google Earth Engine as platform for processing the raster data. And for vector data, we use the ArcMap, and most of the data were the road network, educational institutions, and the socioeconomic facilities data like this. And for the tabular data we have in our hand, likely the agriculture crop production data, 2016, because our last poverty estimate through the direct estimate and the smaller estimation through ELL method was 2016. So one of our objective was to validate or to compare the new non-conventional estimates with the previous smaller estimation data. That's why we have taken the agriculture crop production data 2016, and to process those tabular data, we have used most common the programming language R. So you can see here the data we have used. So particularly what we have done, actually, we have used the convolutional neural network for features extraction from the satellite image. And most specifically, if we say that we use the model that is used by the Facebook for big data analysis. And iteratively, we use 50 epochs for getting better results statistically. If we increase the grid size of the satellite image, it could be possible to get the higher model accuracy, but it takes time. However, it will cost more geocomputational processing. For your kind information, to let you know that what we have exercised here, it took around 5.5 days for processing the whole nighttime data and the whole processing here for the 50 epoch. We can increase those, but as it was a pilot project, but it can be processed in future if it is works. We hope that the process is actually working with better satisfaction. You can see here that the features extractions model accuracy was 71%. That was amazing. That was not beyond our expectation actually. And finally, the model accuracy was found 84%. If we could increase the more features, then it could be about the more about the acceptable limit. You can see here the poverty estimate in 2016 through the ELL method in the left side, and the right side you can see here the random forest model that we have used here. So you can see the similar pattern of the estimates at the sub-district level in Bangladesh of the poverty. So and in the right side you can see the actual value and the predicted value. How we have got very similar nature, very similar pattern of the estimates in Bangladesh using the non-conventional data. So we think that the process we have gone through, it was really wonderful one, and it was a part of the capacity building process in Bangladesh for the non-conventional data using the different sources of data. So we have a lot of scope to increase the scope and input more data in the model. It was, I have mentioned already that I would like to convey my gratitude to all the team members we have worked together here from the different stakeholders here in Bangladesh. So that's all from me to save the time. If you have any question, we can discuss more. Thank you.
Many thanks, Alamgir. So perfect timing. So we have about 15 minutes left. So I will just to leave 5 minutes to Papa for some closing. I will say let's go on for about 10-12 minutes of Q&A. So if I think the mics the microphones are open for everyone who wants to come in with questions, or you can always put in the chat, but I will just give both options. So if anybody who wants to come in, please just jump in without asking. Anybody? Matt Palan? You're on mute. So while Matt Palan, yes.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, host. So I was just wondering, most machine learning algorithms are really good, and happy to see some Jupyter models. I was just wondering, any interesting, large models that have been used so that something in the Giga community like UNICEF for this particular service. Thank you.
Okay, so hold off on the answer. Any other question from the participants? Please come in. Just put your video on, and that will be a signal that you want to speak. Or no one? So do you want to answer? Anybody wants to pick up Matt Palan's question? On AI, I believe it was directed to UNICEF.
I'm not sure I understood exactly the question. So maybe if you can elaborate. I think you're muted if you're speaking. Sorry.
The GIGA project, which is one of those, education project that is going in collaboration with UNICEF as well as ITU. Also, something like the COVAX project, actually, which included the COVAX project, actually, which included the vaccine distribution. So something like that, actually, in that particular large model concept. Thank you.
I'm sorry, apologies. I'm not aware of any work and in UNICEF and yeah.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, Howie, you want to come in?
We have collected a few questions from the registration form. Maybe we can bring some in. One thing is the quality. When data are being integrated, how do you really what kind of quality framework that's being used? The other is, of course, it has been touched upon by a few speakers on the ethical considerations when having access to that. I think if you would like to add more. The third one is it's actually quite a few questions on capacity building. How would our colleagues here offer capacity building activities to our countries so they could also use the model and methods that you'll be using?
And if I may add one additional comment, questions, it's on the issue of access to data. It's probably one of the main constraints, particularly in the use of administrative data sources, but also of other types of sources. So if you have any suggestion, any comment, any thoughts based on your experience, particularly UNICEF in working with admin data, but also Manos. So anyone who would like to comment on that, because clearly there might be, besides the ethical issues that come with access, there is a true constraint, a true problem with access to the data before then we, of course, we address the ethical concerns. Anyone wants to come in first?
I'm happy to say something about this. What else?
Go ahead,
the
Eva.
last. Yeah, so I mean, I think I mentioned this during my presentation, but really access to data has been really like a kind of a bottleneck for us in the piloting of the data integration with education admin data. And part of the reason is it's part of it is really to the education, to the ethical concerns, right? But also like the understanding of how this data is going to be used and how is it valuable and useful for our sector. So that's why actually having just as I was just bringing up and highlighting the ownership, right? Just getting all those stakeholders and Ministry of Education counterparts be part of this process and understand how this is beneficial. That's something that at least in the context of settings where this has not been attempted before, there's the reason. I mean, it's not. I think it's not an assumption we can make that people, because they're not familiar with this data source, like with a household survey, like mixed and multi-topic survey, that they don't necessarily identify as an education survey, right? How is this useful and how is this going to be used for? So I think really for us, what has worked, because for Fiji, we're still addressing the access to the data. So you asked Jero earlier how you were surprised to see the low, the high successful rate, right, in terms of being able to link the records. We have been able to identify schools in Fiji for 94% of the children in the mixed sample, but we haven't linked that, we haven't had access to the ENIS data yet. So we do not know how complete that data is for those, for children, for which we've been able to actually do the link. For Eswatini, it's worked better. We have access to the data, and we can really, with certainty, say that we have, data for these, for 97% of children in the sample. But it's been really also a long process and a very lengthy process to actually have to do a lot of manual work to reconcile inconsistencies. There was, prior to data collection with mix and post during, data processing. So that's been, bringing together and just having the minimal conditions that are needed for data integration is not obvious. I mean, when this has not been done before, these systems are not speaking to each other, right? So something that could be very simple, like, okay, we have an ID for school, an administrative identifier. This is not known to respondents, so we cannot ask respondents about that. But then, so how do we then, what information can we use that can help us integrate records, right? And that, even that is proven challenging because of the inconsistencies or the, or the lack of harmonization in admin units. In the case of Fiji, in the case of Eswatini, it was there was an overlap, so that was not an issue. But then, respondents are reporting names of schools, right? And interviewers have to identify those schools from and select them from a list. So if that original list from EMIS is not properly, prepared, and that obviously, just generates problems. So access to the metadata of the EMIS admin data well in advance, that's very important to assess the potential challenges, I would say. And that's something that we really faced as an issue, like, having access to even complete metadata, knowing what we were dealing with and understanding the scope of EMIS data. Sorry, I'll stop there.
Yeah. Anybody else that would like to
I could add a couple of dimensions to that. In terms of access, just to say that the survey data that have been used to estimate the out-of-school and completion rates are all publicly available data. We have not had, but I guess that's a perennial, of course, call for different organizations to pool resources, given that this is for the global good. But that's a separate question we have not addressed. In terms of quality, I don't want to tire you with the technical details, but we have tried to address issues of survey bias, especially interesting differences between DHS and mixed data on school attendance and completion, age misreporting. I'm only talking about the quality from the survey side, age misreporting, and issues of variance. But there's one other element that I would like to raise, which I think is of general importance, and it relates to what I mentioned in my presentation, because essentially we've tried to bring in education what health, at least for some indicators that depend on multiple sources, like the mortality rates, did about a dozen years ago. The organizations that were responsible, the interagency group, has been trying to bring together the countries to explain the model, to explain the results, to get better sources to improve. That's something we have not done yet. And I think, at least in the case of education, it's a major step forward. The completion rate, which is a global indicator, is now being reported, at least in terms of aggregate trends. So regional and global aggregates, the estimates are based on the model. But at the country level, it's still quite a challenge for a country to recognize that a model-based estimate might be superior to a point estimate from an individual survey. And that's a general question, which I think is not specific to our case. I think it's applicable to other cases, and it's worth revisiting, maybe even within this forum. Thank you.
Okay, unless there is any burning reaction, I guess I just want to give 5 minutes to a few minutes to Papa for the closing, and I don't want to do Papa will not do a pre-closing of the closing, so I will give you the floor. But just one comment. Allow me one comment before I pass it on to Papa. And I think there is if there is one thing besides the technicalities of data integration, which I think it's, I mean, we have seen the many challenges that we all face, but we're working on those challenges, and probably the many will be solved. I think there is one message here which I want to kind of take it home, which is integration for collaboration. So what we have seen all across, for example, even in the last slide in Alamgir, I mean, how integration of these different data sources bring in different agencies together as owners of the different data sources. And the ownership also helps in solving the problem that we've been struggling with, which is the issue of access. So I think it's to use this integration platform, this integration motivation as a platform for greater collaboration across institutions, whether within countries or across country and across agencies. I think this is an important point that it would be useful to continue reflecting on. And with that, thank you to Howie and Charlotte for all the help in setting up this webinar, and you will hear from them a lot more, I'm sure. So thank you, Howie and Charlotte. Papa?
Thanks very much, Jero. I actually thought that I had 15 minutes to summarize everything. So what I've prepared is a 15-minute thing. So you bear with me. No, just
we're
kidding.
All here.
It's really,
we're all here. We'll all be. Go ahead.
No, really, again, thanks very much to everyone for really, I think, a very interesting and riveting conversation. In today's webinar, we all got to hear, had a chance to have a glance of some of the aspects of our work in the Intersecretarial Working Group on the household surveys. But we also do a lot more, and really, again, wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all for all your support of this work. We've seen from today's presentations how using different data sources and ultimately data integration can really fill important data gaps. And further, it also increases the cost effectiveness and relevance of survey data production while increasing accuracy and granularity, whether it is in terms of location, time, or other aspects. And, I think as part of the Intersecretarial Working Group, we've really stressed this aspect, which is really, again, making household surveys more useful and more cost effective. The side event today highlighted 3 key aspects that are really important for data integration. The first one is really about improving accessibility of other data sources for integration. This is critical. We've seen from the presentations of UCSD that, with access both to geospatial information from the DHS and private sector data from Twitter, we're able to produce new insights on violence against women. This highlights the importance of including geospatial information in household surveys, which thankfully is increasingly the case. We need to foster closer and more productive partnerships with the private sector to benefit from the timely, frequent, and enormous data that they are able to harvest and produce mostly in real time. A second point is really about fostering data interoperability by design. We've seen, from ILO, UNESCO, FAO, but also other presentations that, how we were able to increase the utility and relevance of different data sources and showed that, different data sources really do have different strengths that should be exploited. In the case of FAO, the census has large coverage, but provides limited characteristics on the reference population. Vice versa for household surveys. The same can be said for survey data and admin data, as we've seen with UNESCO. And at the end of the day, we really need to, again, continue to, exploit the strengths of these different sources and foster their utility and integration. And, techniques to do that really, I think, will help us in that direction. And a third point that is really, I think, again, quite important is really maintaining the high ethical standards and for data confidentiality. regardless of whether we're using data from surveys, census, admin, or non-traditional private sector data. It is a non-negotiable and primary requirement to protect people's information and to make sure that we are not doing any harm. In the area where I work, violence against women is a critical example where, again, not protecting the data can actually lead to harm and further violence. So it's a crucial factor in data integration, and we should ensure the highest degrees of ethical and safety standards to keep their data private and secure. This protection fosters trust and credibility with our constituents and the people we work with. So in the upcoming UN Tax Commission coming up, when all chief statisticians will meet, our group, which is the Intersecretarial Working Group on Household Surveys, will be reporting on our work under Agenda Item 3C on February 28. That will be on Tuesday. You'll be able to see a summary of the work from our report, and the Secretary will also share a link to the report in the chat. You'll also be able to watch it live stream on UN Web TV. Also, please take a look at our new website that you'll be able to find a lot of resources related to household surveys, innovations such as the topic that we've been just covering today on data integration. We would like to announce the next webinar topic on inclusion. How do we make surveys more inclusive to the marginalized population groups, and to ensure that we hear the voices that have not been reflected in our data. This is a topic that UN Women is quite interested in and that we support. So again, just really again expressing our gratitude and thanks to all, and wishing you a great day, evening, wherever you may be, afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.